Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special presentation to provide some background and explanation for the RCA-Ematai Advanced Healthcare Directive, a very, very important document that has been many years in the making, as we'll understand and hear from our distinguished guests. Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody is the Executive Director of Ematai and a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. He previously was a Rebbe at Yeshivat HaKotel and has written 2 award-winning Sfarim on contemporary halacha and ethics. Rabbi Dr. Jason Weiner is the head of spiritual care at Cedars Sinai Medical Center and the rabbi of Congregation Knesset Israel in Los Angeles. He is a senior consultant at Ematai and the author of 3 Sfarim on medical halacha. Thank you so much, mostly for all of your work on this, but for giving this special session for the members of the RCA to help us understand the importance of this document and the conversation guide, as well as how to use it well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Penner, for this wonderful partnership and friendship. And I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Weiner to start us off this morning. Rabbi Weiner is the one who's really been innovating a lot of this material at Cedar Sinai, and it's been wonderful for us at Ematai to partner with him in many ways in producing this new document, which Baruch Hashem is being used already in the community, and we look forward to only continued further use in collaboration with the RCA. So please, Rabbi Weiner.
Sure, thank you, Rabbi Brody. So I just want to start with the basics. Not everyone knows what an advance directive is, why it's used, when it's used. So I want to just give us the very simple basics so that we're all starting on the same page. And basically, from my experience in a hospital now, almost 20 years serving as a chaplain here, I see that the biggest problem that we have, one of the biggest challenges in medical ethics and hospitals and healthcare, is the fact that on the one hand, there's an incredible bracha that we have the ability to save lives, to prolong lives, to keep people alive. We have all kinds of incredible interventions, whether it's respirators or ECMO machines and different ways that we can keep people alive and save their lives. The challenge becomes, though, sometimes you save a life and that person wouldn't want to endure the suffering that they're enduring, or they might want to, but there's a lot of choices, a lot of options. There's so much we can do. And the question is, should we be doing it? There's forks in the road, and we have to ask the patient, would you want to go this way? Would you want to go that way? Do you want to endure suffering? Do you want to not endure suffering? Do you want to take a risk? Do you want to try this experimental treatment? There's so many questions that come up. And the thing is, thanks to the incredible bracha of the medical interventions that we have today, the people are alive, but they often can't speak for themselves. We often have patients who are being kept alive in a way that we cannot communicate with them in any way whatsoever. So the truth is, this first came up in the history of bioethics, so to speak. The landmark case was a case called Karen Ann Quinlan in 1976. She found herself in a coma. You might have heard of this case. And actually, her parents thought that she would not want to endure this suffering. And her parents wanted the hospital to take her off the respirator, which would have ended her life. And the hospital was unwilling to do it. It shows things have changed in the 45 years since then, because at that time hospitals were not willing to what you would call pull the plug, extubate, and it became a court case. And one of the results of that was the innovation to create advanced directives. They said, if we only would have had the chance for her to explain what she would have wanted while she was healthy and of clear mind, we would know right now, and we could actually have it legally binding, and we would have been able to follow her values. And so anyone who cares that their values, their goals, their preferences be respected when they can't speak for themselves should have an advance directive. Now, I would think that would apply to anyone. Anyone would hope that their values are respected, and anyone would want to prevent the grief and the stress it causes to families and the stress to the healthcare team, but especially an Orthodox Jew who has very specific values and preferences. They, especially if you want to ensure that your values are respected, you need to have an advance directive to ensure this. And the truth is, we have Mari Makomos, and it's not going to be a whole shir right now, but I mean, the rabbis have discussed this for many years. The Chachmas Adam, for example, mentions that in Berlin, there was an ancient minhag. This was lost in the Holocaust, one of the many things lost in the Holocaust, in addition to holy neshamas. But there was an ancient minhag in Berlin that anyone who is in a hospital for 3 days, once it's 3 days, they automatically, the Chevra Bikra Cholim would go around and say vidui with them and also prepare their tzava. They should have some kind of last will and testament prepared. It was a way of saying, like, don't be afraid. Everyone does it. People sometimes get afraid, is it like some kind of ayin hara or some kind of al tiftach peh satan? Should I really be talking about my death? I actually was just looking over this morning Rav Avadia Yosef's tshuva on life insurance, where he says there's a chiyuv to have life insurance. And one of the proofs he gives is that we have a tradition that if you purchase your burial plot while you're alive and well, it's a segula for richas yamim. And no one says, well, I'm not going to die. Like there is a minhag to purchase one's burial plot. So too, the Chavetz Chaim actually writes, Im eina nili mili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And he says, based on that, you should have a tzava. And it's become much more important today in our modern day and age that people express their values. And it's a gift to one's family who has to make these decisions, and it ensures that halacha will be followed. So there's been a lot of ways of doing this throughout the years, especially since the 70s, since the Karen and Quinlan case. There's been some who came up with something that's just, a proxy, a durable power of attorney, where they just say, you know what, just list who is your proxy, who should speak for you, which is important because people know a lot of people and they might not know, do I want it to be my spouse, my child, my friend, my doctor, who do I want to speak for me? So that there's a benefit to that, obviously, at least you're giving that information, but then you call, when the person's in the hospital, and we have this experience in the hospital, the person's here, God forbid they were in an accident or something happened unexpected, we call the person who's listed as their proxy, and that person has absolutely no idea what they would have wanted. Sometimes, extreme cases, and this has even happened sometimes with rabbis, because people will list a rabbi that they don't know very well, you'll call the proxy, and they'll say, I'm so sorry, I'm not sure who that is. And we're like, you're listed as their proxy, and they're not even sure who the person is. So that method is, obviously very limited. The other method is called a living will or an advance directive. That's where you give lots of detailed data and explanation. I would never want a feeding tube. I would never want to be on a respirator. I would never want this. I would never want that. Of course, there are limitations to that as well. First of all, there could be halachic limitations. If you put something in your choice there that's prohibited by halacha, then obviously you're going to have a problem. Also, when we fill these out, in my department, we'll talk about this at the end, but in my department of chaplains, we actually required that every chaplain has to have one. We said, how can we encourage our patients and do these with them if we haven't done it ourselves? So we all have one. I did mine. I was in my early 30s when I did mine. And so hopefully it won't be needed for, decades and decades. And how can we predict what we're going to be suffering from, what the illness will be, what technology will be? Over the years, the technology is constantly advancing in the hospital. So there are some limits to a durable power of attorney. One way that some people had, tried to overcome that, and Rabbi Brody's going to talk about this more in detail, I won't go into depth, is to say, just have a proxy and then make sure to have a conversation with your proxy and tell them some basic information, and they'll attach like a writer, legal, like a writer, some kind of document that will be a basic description. But what we found is that you don't always know what questions to ask, what issues to discuss. That's what we tried to do here. So many people were doing this, but they needed some kind of a tzura, some kind of a guide for what questions to ask. We realized though that it could be a trap. Like if you put something on your advance directive that you don't know what the situation is going to be, it's very delicate. So what we decided to do, first we did this, as Rabbi Brody mentioned, at Cedar Sinai, and then Ematai, and he was very kind in his remarks to me, and with as much as he deserves it, I will be kind that Ematai, in utilizing social workers, doctors, rabbanim, lawyers, took what we started at Cedar Sinai and brought it to a whole nother level. I mean, Ematai made it an absolutely incredible document that we're very proud to share with people, and the feedback has been really moving to hear how people are using this to have really meaningful, important, difficult, but profound conversations with their loved ones and their rabbis, and enabling their rabbinic relationship to grow incredibly. And so what we decided to do, and now we're getting to the tachlis, is to create both documents, a proxy and a living will, but to separate them and to make it as simple as possible. And I'm going to show it to you right now, to have a very simple proxy document where and we'll go through it now. That's the legally binding document. And that's what you'll give to your doctor, keep with your legal documents, upload to your hospital's medical system, give to your proxy list. It just asks a couple questions that I'll show you, and you can literally, we'll go over it right now in 3 minutes. And then there's a separate document, a separate form that's meant for you and your proxy and your rabbi to be able to have a conversation, and then they keep that document. This is not a legally binding document. It doesn't need to go in with legal documents. It's just to help your proxy and your rabbi to be guided in your decision making and guided based on their values. So here's the document. I'll show you the actual form. And as you'll see, it's just a couple pages. It's very simple. The form, you just put your name, your address, your phone number, just the ways they can reach you, and you list your proxy. That also has alternates, but hospitals really benefit, healthcare providers benefit from having one proxy, because they need to know who's the machria, who's the one making the decision. It does not mean you love one person more than the other. It just means this is the person that I know is easy to reach, is comfortable with difficult decisions, is comfortable in hospitals, knows me the best, whatever it is. Here's my proxy who will make those decisions, who you should contact. Here's how to reach them. You fill out as much of it as you can, whether it's their cell phone number, their email, however you can reach them, and you put them as your proxy. That means they're the person who's legally been requested to speak for them.
Are you suggesting, Rabbi Weiner, that it's better not to put in the alternatives, or just make sure there's one proxy and then there's alternatives?
Make sure there's one proxy and alternatives.
Okay.
It's very important to have alternatives. And what's unique about this, so you have your proxy and you have alternatives, but then the proxy is the primary person that will be called. Then what we added to this, and what makes it especially unique and Jewish, is that you also list who your rabbi is. And I'm not going to read the whole document, but you basically say, my proxy has full authority to make decisions for me about my healthcare, including end-of-life care. If I'm not able to make or communicate healthcare decisions for myself, this includes my desire, which I hereby direct my proxy, that all decision-making about my healthcare should be done in accordance with Jewish law and custom. And then you list your rabbi, your rabbi, their name, phone number, and however you can contact them. Now, this is a major part of what makes this a Jewish document, is that it's saying, I have a proxy, but I care about Judaism. I care about halacha. So I have a rabbi, and I want you to consult my rabbi. And because sometimes either your rabbi might not be available, sometimes this is very urgent, or, like I gave myself an example, hopefully my rabbi won't be called for, decades and decades. So maybe that rabbi that I listed there won't be the rabbi of my shul anymore, or won't be alive, you never know. So it's also important to have a backup, an alternate also for the rabbi. The rabbi, you also are listing, you have either a backup individual or an alternate institution. And that in that way, you can have, you're making it clear who your rabbi is and who you want to be contacted, but you have others who can be contacted in case of emergency or in the moment that they can't be reached. And that's it. The last thing you have is simply, you need to have either 2 witnesses or a notary. There are some states, and so we listed it here, where you need both. But in general, for the most part, it's either 2 witnesses, just not someone who's we have, it's listed here who can't be just, they need to be over 18, and not someone who's going to inherit from you, things like that. But it can be pretty much anyone else who's, not a relative, and they witness it, or you get it notarized, whichever you prefer, and that's your document. That you now have your proxy complete. You've made it clear who your proxy is, and that you want Jewish law consulted in the decision-making process based on your rabbi, and you now have a legal document. The goal of this is to be as simple as possible, and so hopefully you can see that that's a pretty simple document to fill out. There's more, and we'll get to it, but the basic legal document that really everyone should have, I've heard Rabbanim say, once you turn 16, you should have. There's Mar Makomos to say at age 50 is the proper time, but some say once you turn 16, once you're driving, you're engaged in that level of risk, everyone should have an advance directive, and we see that it is of great toilets. It really makes a big difference. I'll turn it over now to Rabbi Brody.
Actually, even before we go to Rabbi Brody, let me actually open up because I want to be able to have everyone remember this part. We have for those of you who are watching a small studio audience who are here to try to ask some of the questions that you might ask on a larger Zoom. So a couple of questions. Is one able, I'll ask one of the questions that came in, but others can unmute themselves. Is one able to appoint a matai to be that rabbi or to be that rabbinic consultation itself?
Yeah. So one thing we encourage, I'll turn right now, go to Rabbi Brody, is putting in an organization. You might say, the shul I go to represents my hashkafa. So here's my rabbi, and if he's not available, here's the name of the organization or the yeshiva or Ematai. But you could say, here's my shul. Just contact the rabbi of the shul, whoever that is at that time, and then as an alternate, you could put Ematai, Rabbi Brody.
Yeah, listen, we always encourage people to send a harav. So we think that people should have the rabbi they regularly have contact with. That should be the person that they appoint, and that should be the default. We have a 24/7 helpline, and we tell people on the document and the explanations, you can always list this as an alternate with our number to reach us in case, rabbis sometimes aren't available, whatever it might be. Occasionally, there are unfortunate situations where people have outlived their rabbanim, so to speak. I mean, it literally happens, and they haven't built new relationships, whatever it might be. And okay, we tell people then, okay, we will be happy to be your, the rabbinic fill that role. Myself, Rabbi Weiner, others who work with us in this. But the ideal should be a selach harab. I mean, the goal here is to get people to think about this and to actually appoint someone who also maybe could be at the hospital, have a personal relationship. Because as we know, some of these questions that come up aren't just halachic. There's also a pastoral element as well. But yes, Ematai is available.
So that's fine. So if the form doesn't, if the language of the form doesn't exactly work for an institution per se, so one could just write there and make it clear what they mean by that alternate, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And the whole
You can
idea
just
is
write that in as long as it's witnessed and signed and et cetera.
that's right. That's right. I mean, the idea of alternates is important for your power of attorney, the proxy, because sometimes that person isn't around, and it's important for the rabbi because sometimes you can't reach the rav.
Okay, other questions from the audience?
I saw that the Rabbi Engel asked about different states. So that's a good question. There are models out there that try to personalize for different states. We follow the Ematai on the advice of a number of lawyers and attorneys, the model of the American Bar Association, which is a multi-state document. The key part of it was being machmer, so to speak, being very stringent about who can be a witness. So, for example, in Illinois, all you need is one witness. But we tell people to put down two witnesses. Because if you show up in Florida with a document and only see one witness, they might get the heebie-jeebies about it, right? So we didn't want to get people in that type of situation. There are 4 states, which we mentioned here on the document, Texas, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, and Ohio, which require a little bit of a rider to explain, something I know this is, and it's on our website. That should be attached as well to the document. But this is a multi-state document that can be used anywhere in the United States. There's different versions for Ontario and Quebec and soon British Columbia because those have different laws.
When do you recommend redoing this based on the various individuals you've appointed and their availability, whether they're alive, et cetera?
Anytime in someone's healthcare journey where they've hit a crossroads, I certainly think it's appropriate to look at this. The default we usually recommend is, though, once every 5 years to take a look at this document.
Okay, that's an important thing to know. Okay, any other questions you can unmute and ask on this section?
I'll add another question. Thanks so much for your amazing presentation thus far. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. I already put it in the chat, but do you have any guidance on what happens when a congregant is asking their Rav to serve as the actual proxy? I've resisted that for various reasons having to do with family dynamics, other family members in a crisis. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that about sort of the chatchila b'diavad in that circumstance. There are people who are just alone, and there was a question already about the hotline. I'm curious your thoughts.
We tell people the default, you should find someone not the rabbi. The reason is that one of the things we explain in instructions as well is that the person who's being a power of attorney proxy needs to be present, needs to be available. And rabbis have many, many commitments. They can't always be present and available that way. You're absolutely right, and Rabbi Weiner can speak to this with great experience. The problem of people not having someone to be there for them is a real one. It's a really big issue. everywhere I've spoken, we've done a lot of workshops on this already. There's one person that comes up to me afterwards and says, I don't got anyone. And I started talking to them, a niece, a cousin, a best friend, whatever it might be. And it's part of the things I think that our communities need to be started thinking about. Maybe Biko Cholim can help out in this, but others, to make sure that everyone in our community should feel they have someone who will be there for them.
Okay, very important. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the second part of the presentation. Thanks, Rabbi Brody.
Okay, so I just want to explain a little bit what we've done based on what has existed already in the community. Because of course in Ematai, we're not reinventing the wheel here, and we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And this issue of what should look like in a halachic living will, and it's not really so much a living will as much here as a proxy, an advance directive, and we'll see a conversation guide, really started emerging in the late 80s and 90s of a big debate. And the debate went sort of like this in terms of how to think about these issues. You had on the one hand someone like Rabbi Lord Emanuel Jacobovitz, one of the great figures of Jewish medical ethics, of course, the chief rabbi of England, who felt that the whole concept of a living will, as Rabbi Weiner was explaining, in the courts and in the culture, he just felt it's foreign to Jewish thought. The will of a Yid is always to live. And so this whole concept of a living will didn't make much sense to him, of having choices and what to be done. Now, as opposed to that approach, you had a different approach, which was taken by Rabbi Tendler. And Rabbi Tendler, very much involved in RCA at the time, who felt very much following the positions of his father-in-law, of Moshe Zassal, that the idea of a living will is acceptable, but on condition that certain things are made clear, certain things are off limits. For example, he felt that it always had to be very explicit, that you could never withdraw or not provide, hydration or nutrition. And so he wanted to create and say, listen, the American Medical Association is creating these documents. Let's make a halachic version of this, which includes very explicit types of statements and directives that can or cannot be made. So if you see here, for example, he has something here we add here in this document that was produced by the RCA in 1991, the idea that your agent will have power but cannot be allowed to make decisions about artificial nutrition and hydration, right? And moreover, you see here, and this is not unique to the RCA, a tremendous model here. We have this graph. You have 4 situations: a coma, right? Permanent brain damage, or terminal illness, but no terminal illness. And then you have a list of procedures. You want CPR, you want mechanical breathing, surgery, dialysis, and whatnot. And this is a proper living will, which means while you're alive, the will is to have this I want or do not want. And this is a beautiful document that was really following the model of what the healthcare society was promoting at the time. And so you see that this was there. And another thing that also Rabbi Tanner put in here was an issue of regarding to organ donation as well, which we'll come to later on. Now, another model that existed at the time, which also came out about the same year, was the model from the Aguda, which is also a wonderful model, which continues to exist. And the Aguda model more or less said, we're just going to say that you should appoint a proxy. There is too many different procedures, there are too many situations, we're not sure. Everyone should appoint a proxy, a power of attorney, and of course they should appoint a Rav, and we'll follow those situations as we go along. Right, so you had a model which recognized we need to have something of a living will, because that's what's required today in medical and scenarios in hospitals, nursing homes, whatever it might be, but we want to have a more simplified model, a proxy and a basic directive to follow halacha. And it included in there recognition that we're not going to get into all the details and the weeds of this. There's a whole history of this, but over time, the RCA model more or less became similar to the Aguda model. The RCA model became a little bit too complicated for people. And it wasn't because the RCA's model was problematic. It was because the whole model of living wills became problematic, where social scientists and doctors and nurses and lawyers started to recognize that this idea of having this type of chart and figuring out I want or do not want X, Y, or Z in A, B, C, D, or situations just doesn't make sense. People didn't know what they're signing. They didn't know what they're talking about, whatever it might be. And so what became the model that existed in both the RCA and the Aguda world is more or less have a proxy and appoint a Rav, but also has a little bit in some of it, certainly in the Aguda models, which is totally fine. If people want this, this is great. Some pretty strong statements of values. So, for example, if you look in the medical halachic directive, you can find for Florida, but others as well, one of the models there says, like, I want my medical providers not just to know if I care about halacha, but I don't want to be pressured, right, and told and asked to make changes and other things like this, right? There's sort of a very strong statement, which is fine if that's how you want to express yourself and come into the scenarios about it. Or if you look at the Ontario version, you can see a strong statement about that I believe that under Jewish law, right, that I want to receive all possible life-sustaining health care for as long as possible. I believe this to be true, which is totally fine if that's what people understand halacha to mean, and that's what approach they want to take. So one of the things that we were trying to figure out is that really what people want to declare? And we try to simplify in our document of making a much more basic statement of saying, listen, I want Jewish law and custom to be at the front and center of decisions being made. That's very, very important, right, to us. And that's important to the person who's making this type of decision, right, this type of declaration. It's very important you say this. We say this in about 3 different ways on it. Now, as to what Jewish law requires, okay, if we pull up the document here, we're going to see that Jewish law, I'm just pulling it up here, sorry to share it more. Yes, the Jewish law requires when the shaila comes up, when the questions come up, I'll ask the rabbinic consultant to advise about what should be done or shouldn't be done. You'll notice here that the formulation we had was very carefully formulated of a rabbinic consultant that you advise your proxy to consult with. Why do we do this? Of course, we want people to be using their rabbanim as resources for psak, for wisdom, for guidance. But we were careful to make sure that on the legal level, there's no ambiguity who the proxy is. I had lawyers in 4 different countries who argued to me that if someone actually wanted to challenge some of the existing models, they would say it's ambiguous. Who's actually the proxy? Is it the family member, whoever it might be, who was appointed? Is it the rabbi, or is it something called Orthodox Jewish law and custom? And in one case, there's even a situation where someone told me that a hospital in Maryland made a rabbi come down from New Jersey because they felt that he had co-powers as a power of attorney, and they weren't going to allow the family to sign off alone on it. So we were very careful to have this type of formulation in order to make sure that there's no ambiguity about who the power of attorney is and to make those decisions. And you'll see that we have a strong legal element here that we want to make sure that's understood. We want the power of attorney to make decisions. And if, for whatever reason, a medical conservator or guardian has to come into the situation, we want that person to be the proxy that I've appointed. In most cases, it doesn't go to the courts, doesn't go to a situation, but vast majority of cases, but we wanted to give some teeth to the document and to make sure. And so I think that this is one of the ways that we've tried to, working on the shoulders of giants, to improve the documents that have existed, to make types of statements that people feel comfortable making, to deal with some of the legal issues. Of course, you'll see aesthetically, it's a much easier document to fill out than some of the other documents. This is also a fillable PDF, right? It's easily accessible. And we'll see as we go along as well. But as Rabbi Weiner is now going to explain why I think is the most important element in some ways of what we've been trying to do. Because when I went to a number of our poskim that we turned to at Ematai, Rav Asher Weiss, Rav Herschel Schechter, Rav Mordechai Willig, and others, and I said to them, when people ask you to be their Rav, like what do you say to them? Like, what do you want them? And they all said to me, the first question they ask people, when shadows come up, they ask, the first question is, what would you want? Like, what is it you'd want? And what is it that you think, and as in general, you want to follow halacha, that's where you're coming to me. But I want to know, because this is their way of thinking about these issues, also a bit about your general values and your preferences. And that's very hard for people to articulate. And we wanted to create a tool for people to be able to articulate this. Now, we're not the only ones who want to create tools like this. So if you look in the general society, you'll see things like the Conversation Project or 5 Wishes or others. And these are wonderful websites that are out there for the general society in which you have tools in which you can express your general wishes. Those are great. They're not halachically sensitive at all. And they get into a lot of questions and create a lot of ambiguities on a legal level and whatnot that can create all sorts of problems. So we wanted to create something like that where people could talk about their general values and preferences within the realm of halacha, and to carefully choose questions that wouldn't be like the old living will, where it's very detailed in A, B, C, D situations. Do X, Y, or Z, or don't do X, Y, or Z. But instead to give some general values and preferences that open the healthy conversation between a person and their loved ones and their rabbi. And so we're very proud of the conversation guide of adding this now to the Orthodox community's toolkit in terms of being able to talk about these issues in a way which we think is best practice today in medical society. It's recognized that this is a good way of having these conversations, but is also halachically sensitive for our community, and makes it possible for people to talk about these issues, which are so hard to talk about. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Weiner to walk us through the document in terms of the conversation guide. But I just want to say that as for Rabbanim, one of the things that we've seen is that family members find it so relieving when they use this document. They feel a sense of relief because they know they've had to talk about this and they haven't had a tool to do it. In fact, one of the RCA members, I was at a show in Boston earlier this year, we did a workshop, and since then he's inviting couples one by one to come to his office and to fill out this document, both a power of attorney, and even if they've done a power of attorney document, do the conversation guide, which he feels is a great pastoral tool. So Rabbi Weiner, if you can, let's walk through the document, then we'll sort of take questions about this piece as well.
Sure. And let me just pause for a moment to make sure we're not losing anyone and that this is totally clear, because I also see a question in the chat that makes me see that I wasn't totally clear at the beginning. And so let me just summarize as we begin to move forward. So there's really two models of documents that are out there. There's a proxy / power of attorney. That's one type of model. That's A, either where you only appoint a proxy. Then B is where someone either has it's either called an advance directive or living will. That's the document, like Rabbi Tendler's document from the 90s that was mentioned and others, where it's the detailed list of what one would want. What I've shown so far, what we've both shown, but the one document we went over is really a proxy, but it's a little bit more than a proxy.
How important is it in today's technological world that that person be local, able to visit the person personally, given these competing factors that we're talking about now?
It definitely helps, but it's not absolutely required. And we do hope that people will make the decisions collaboratively with their families, right? So just because you appoint one person doesn't mean to the exclusion of all others. It's best when people actually have a conversation, which is what we'll talk about now, where they say to their family, you know, my mom, she told me this. She said, look, you work in a hospital, so I'm telling your sister, don't feel bad, but I'm appointing you. You know, I appointed her for financial things. She has an MBA. You're a rabbi. You don't know about money. So I'm joking, but not totally. So I'll go to her for financial issues and you to medical. But I want you both, obviously, I'm putting you both on the document because I'm hoping that you'll both talk about it together. It's not because I love one more than the other. It's just you're easy to reach. You work in the hospital that I go to. You know, it's like, so we hope they'll work together, but we have to list the one that we think it will be the easiest to reach, will best reflect your values. And it's also important to point out that by American law and by halacha, actually, the goal of the proxy is not to do what they think's in your best interest. Their job is to say what you would say right now if you were the one speaking. And
Right.
so,
but there is no legal test
already
for
created a
that.
document.
But there is no legal test.
They want a rabbi called. I'm sorry.
Right, but there is no legal test for that. In other words, they can't be challenged as doing
Right.
something. Could be
Right.
okay. Understood. As Rabbi Weiner is going to now go to the conversation guide amongst the Rabbanim, we understand that the premise of this is that, as Rabbi Brody said, that I think many people are unaware that halacha very much takes into account the desires and needs of the patient. I think that the average balabas assumes that halacha, it's either flexible or not flexible, but it really is not there. It's that one's own personal wishes are not part of the psak. And of course, those who are Talmidim of those who have been mentioned before, we've heard this from Rav Shechter many times, that's a very significant part of what the proper psak is, and that's why this is so important. So Rabbi Weiner, we'll go to the next section. Thanks.
Exactly. And obviously there's times when halacha is black and white. It's very clear something's us or something's mutter, but there are times when the values matter. And what we wanted to do with this guide that we're now going to go through is there's 2 points. Point number one, is that it is not a list of interventions that you want or don't want. We're not listing here, I want artificial nutrition, I don't want it. I want dialysis, I don't want it. We're not listing medical procedures. We're trying to help people articulate what their values are, what their general goals are, what their general preferences are when it comes to making medical decisions, so that we can try to apply that to a diverse spectrum of circumstances. It's just helping us understand who that person is. Number two, we often get the call, so-and-so was just diagnosed, God forbid, with a horrible illness. What do we do now? We just feel like a deer in the headlights. We don't know what move to make next. What question should I be asking? What should I be thinking about? And a lot of what we're going to go through now is those questions, not about specifically what interventions you want, but it's to help people think about what matters most in these crucial points in their life and what should they be thinking about. So I'm going to go through it. I'm going to kind of highlight the major points, and I'll scroll through so you can see it. We won't go through every single point of it right now, but I'll just kind of mention them as we go through, and then we encourage you to take the time to read through it. And if you have congregants who ever say, like, I need to talk to my loved one about serious issues, here's a good example of the questions you should be thinking about. So, for example, we want to help a person articulate what are their general pain and risk tolerance. For example, I value undergoing potentially painful treatments if they have the potential of prolonging my life, even if they will not cure my underlying illness and may lead to significant discomfort. So are you someone who says, yeah, I agree. I strongly agree. I'm willing to endure pain. Do whatever it takes to keep me alive at all costs. Or are you someone who says, no, I strongly disagree? You'll ask the rabbi case by case. But it helps to know, are you someone who says, I do not want to endure pain? Or, for example, it is in the middle there. It is my medical team's responsibility to try to balance pain relief with maintaining my alertness. When it's difficult to maintain both, I would prefer for them to prioritize either pain relief, even if it means not being as alert or awake, or alertness, even if it means I may suffer pain or other symptoms. Do you have a preference about focusing on pain relief or alertness? We have questions here about, I value undergoing a high-risk procedure that might shorten my life or jeopardize my life if it could, and then you can choose if it would possibly cure my illness. Yes, I would undergo pain for that, or just stabilize my condition, but not cure my illness. Maybe you have different feelings, or possibly extend my life by any amount of time, but not cure my illness. Would you want to undergo a high-risk, painful procedure for that? And if we haven't dealt with specific issues, but this has brought up something for you, we can encourage people to write in the comments. There's place for them to explain more. And of course, yes, this is assuming that they can't communicate right now, because that's why you need the advance directive. They can't talk for themselves at this moment. Or there's issues related to how they make decisions. This comes up all the time in hospitals, as I'm sure you know, when, let's say someone's in surgery, they're in a procedure, they're in imaging, and the doctor finds something. It wasn't expected. It's worse than expected. It's different than expected. And they come out to the waiting room and they tell the family, here's what we found. And now they have to think to themselves, how are we going to tell them? How are we going to break the news? Should we break the news? Should we keep it quiet? So we have opportunities for people to list here while they're healthy and well. As the patient, I generally prefer knowing either as little as possible about my condition, only a general summary, all the details. If I have a terminal illness, I prefer not knowing how quickly it's progressing, only having a very general sense of my prognosis, or knowing the best detailed estimation for how long I have to live. If I'm deemed terminally ill, I would prefer treatments focused only on comfort, treatments focused on comfort and managing symptoms, treatments focused on extending life without prioritizing comfort. A question that comes up, let's say someone's diagnosed, God forbid, with dementia, but it's still early stages, and they want to get this done so that they can ensure their values are respected when they can't articulate them well anymore. So if they have a irreversible lack of cognition, would they want to have treatments focused on comfort and managing symptoms, like pain management, or treatments focused on managing symptoms while also being open to painful treatments, or treatments focused on extending life without prioritizing comfort? And then finally, we have a couple questions here that also comes up a tremendous amount about independence, social and physical independence. Do I worry about needing someone to help me with my basic daily activities? I worry about that a lot or not a lot. Feeling that I'm a burden. People often discuss, would they want to be a burden? Do they feel like they're a burden? Do they feel like, no, this is what we do for our family? Do they worry about being alone and feeling lonely? Are they someone who's okay with being alone, or is that a big concern to them? That could be a big nafkamina when it comes to making decisions about placement and things in their life. If it became difficult for me to live at my home, And now you have to decide, the family's deciding where to put them. I would value being cared for in the home of a family member, being cared for in a nursing home or long-term care facility. They could say, I strongly disagree, I strongly agree. Remaining in my home, even if it meant limitations in the amount of skilled medical care I could receive. These questions really help family members make decisions about where to care for their loved one. Again, these are not necessarily halachic decisions, but it helps us to know, how should we be planning? Should I be setting aside a room in my house for my loved one and trying to create like an ICU in my home? Or do they say, no, I want to be in an assisted living facility. That's where they have the resources. This is important to know. And then we really want people to be able to fill it just right, free flow right. And we actually gave them a paragraph that I think is a really important paragraph, where we say, express preferences about where, with whom you'd want to be at the end of your life. Describe what does it mean to you, a good death or a bad death? What would you want your funeral to be like? We say you might find it helpful to invoke memories of the dying process or death of loved ones and discuss what you found meaningful or disturbing about the experience. For example, I hated how Uncle David suffered for so many painful procedures, or I admired my friend Sarah for fighting until the end. It meant a lot that my mother died in her own home, surrounded by her family. Or you may want to finish this sentence. What matters to me at the end of life is. And this is just a chance for people to, it might be, it matters for me that my family's there. It matters for me that I'm in this city. It matters for me that there's no this, no that. People have their own idiosyncrasies, and they should be able to share a little bit about what they want. And this is, again, this document is just for the proxy and for the rabbi to keep for themselves. When they get that call, oh, so-and-so listed you as their rabbi. And you might even say to yourself, oh, I know they showed up once for Yom Kippur. And well, you have to make a decision. And this is a decision for which halacha would say, well, it matters, because you could go both ways on this decision. It matters what matters for that person. Well, this document could really help you understand what they want. And even more profoundly, as Rabbi Brody mentioned, this is an opportunity for people to actually have that conversation, not just to fill this out quickly on the side, but to actually sit down with their rabbi, with their loved ones, and say, let's talk about these things. Because so often we don't talk about them. We're afraid to talk about them. And we find that when we do talk about them, it's very meaningful and very insightful and very inspiring. It actually helps us to appreciate the time that we have even more. And so it can really be a gift for the individual filling it out, and especially also for their proxy and for their rabbi. I just went through it quickly, but just to give you a feeling for what types of questions it's asking, to help you understand who the person is and what their goals, values, and preferences are.
And I want to
Like an
add
amazing
that
document. Yeah.
I want to add that you don't have to answer every question. Like if you fill it all out, that's not the key. It's not a formal legal document. So we've had many cases of people say, I have preferences about 8 of these issues. Great. Look at the document at the end and say, does that give you a little bit of a picture? And I see
Right.
Rabbi Engel's pointing out this, the conversation and the chat here. Well, people's perspectives can change over time. So that's exactly why we don't want it to be a living will with a real clear directives in terms of specifics. And if the whole point is to open the conversation patterns and the conversation pathways. And so if your view changes over time, you go back to the people you discuss this with and say, either, I've shifted my value on this, or you take this non-legal document, you rip it up, and you go and fill it out again with from the website, from the RCA website, you get the document down. So
Yeah,
it's
we
the
have a
type
lot that good. We have a lot that we want to still cover in the few minutes. I just want to see if anyone has a question at this point that they want to ask on this section. Let me just ask one question, because I know that you're telling us that the people are finding it very, very meaningful once they have the conversations. What is advice that you can give to a rabbi to give to Balabatim about how to enter into this conversation in the first place? How to bring it up with a loved one, how to find the right setting, because I'm sure there is a lot of anxiety about engaging in the conversation in the first place.
I mean, I would say part of the reason I brought up that minhag in Berlin at the beginning was because if you can find a way to say this is something that everyone should do, especially many shuls use it like Parshas Vayechi, things like that, where we try to focus on these types of issues. And if the rabbi can take leadership and say, I'm encouraging everyone to do this. So if you come to your loved one and say, we should do this, it's not like, oh, why? Did you hear something? Do I look bad? It's no, the rabbi said everyone should do this, even if they're 20 years old. This is something that we're encouraging everyone to have. Like I said, in my department, we required everyone to have one. Actually, we said you have to have an advance directive on file, just because how can you encourage others? But for example, we do seminars, workshops, and this is a great program for you to do in your shul on a Motzei Shabbos or a Sunday morning. Rabbi Brody and I have been doing these, and you could do this in your shul where you pass these out and you walk people through this and you give them a pen and paper and you go slower than I went. I was just trying to give you a feeling for it, but you go very slowly. You ask each question and then pause, and you tell everyone should be doing this. So it's not isolating or pinpointing one person. It's trying to encourage everyone to have this.
Is this usually carried out in a conversation, or most people you find are filling it out by themselves? Because it's called a conversation guide. Obviously either one is fine, but where do you see it used most?
Either is fine. We want to encourage it to be a conversation, because that's where the real juice, the meat of the conversation comes out. And it's scary, as it came up. People are scared to talk about this, but they always find, wow, that was I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Okay, great. Let's go to the next section. Thanks.
So I just want to briefly make sure we cover one issue that has been an issue for living wills, or used to be called halachic living wills, in the community. As you saw earlier, on the original 1991 living will from the RCA, there's an option for organ donation, which more or less assumed brain death. It also had there an option that said very clearly you can never withhold nutrition and hydration. Neither of those issues are matters of halachic consensus. So there are many poskim that don't accept brain death, of course, and don't allow, therefore, organ donation after irreversible cessation of respiration. And there are some poskim who, in certain situations, will allow things to be withheld, including nutrition and hydration. And so part of the idea, as we said, is we want to avoid getting into some of the details and the weeds. And so the RCA document that we have produced together, right, with Ematai, doesn't get into any of those issues, including the issue of organ donation. However, for some people, the issue of organ donation, even though it doesn't come up very often, like my guess is each rabbi maybe will get the shiloh once in their career, right, in terms of there's brain death and organ donation is possible. I'm not talking about a chaplain like Rabbi Weiner, but I'm saying in general. So if that's the situation, it's a lot of time to spend on an issue which doesn't come up as often as other issues do come up. However, it still is an important issue, because when the issue does come up, it's a matter of life and death. And so in the general Ematai Netivot, the original version that we produced, we created a nusach, a language, which says that organ donation, would you want organ donation to be done in a situation where death has been determined in consultation with my rabbi under Jewish law and custom? And we found that some rabbis very much actually would like to have that question, for a couple of reasons. Either because they're big supporters of brain death criterion organ donation, or they have balabatim who are filling out the form of the DMV, right, or with Donate Life, and that's an advanced legal directive. If you sign your driver's license, so to speak, right, in that situation, they don't have to ask anyone, not a rabbi, a family member, whoever it might be, because you've given them an advanced legal directive. And so some have said, make sure to have available an option where people can choose this, but still keep the power, ultimate decision-making in the hands of the family member in consultation with their Rav. And so both options exist. Both have the approval of Rav Willig or Rav Schechter. They're based on the formulations that we have. And depending on the rabbi and the congregation, what formulation you want to use, they're both equally acceptable. I have found that sometimes I can get through the organ donation question. People are like, yeah, I get it. Okay. And other times when I do a workshop, the whole conversation gets dominated by organ donation. And that's a big distraction, because I can't even get to the conversation guide on this issue. Each rabbi should decide for themselves which one they want to use. And, Shalom Al Yisrael. This was a big issue that became very heated in ways which I can't fully explain. But it doesn't have to be that way. And each Rav can decide how they want to present them to their community.
Correct. So just to be clear, we have the official RCA version left off the question. However, the official Ematai version, which is available on the Ematai website, does have the question. And the posing of the question, again, it doesn't simply say organ donation, but organ donation after halachic death, and that has to be defined by the rabbi. Keeping that on there was approved by both Rav Schechter and Rav Willig.
Yeah,
so an individual Rav can either use the RCA version. A number of Rabbanim asked us to make it simpler, it shouldn't, as Rabbi Brody's saying, become the topic of the entire signing of it. If it's something that their own rabbi doesn't approve of, to leave it off the document altogether. But you certainly should feel that if you want to use that document, the other document, that you should use the regular Netivot Advanced Care, and that's on their website.
And to be clear, Rav Willig and Rav Schechter, it wasn't just that question that they approved of. They reviewed the entire
Yes.
document and gave
Thank
their
you.
explicit haskama to the entire thing, which is
Yes.
really great.
We'll add also that amongst other rabbis and poskim who have reviewed it as well, but Rav Willig and Rav Schechter made it very clear on it as well. Rabbi
Yes.
Weiner, maybe just give us a little bit of practical guides now for rabbis.
So we, as mentioned, we strongly encourage that people, suggest that people consider this. This is segula for richas yamim. As I mentioned at the outset, as is purchasing one's burial plot. There's a basic responsibility that everyone has, whether it's life insurance or to have a financial will or to be responsible. They should also have an advance directive, and this is a Jewish and sensitive advance directive. You can do this in a workshop or in any other format, but it's crucial that then the first part, the legally binding part, the simple part that we went over at the beginning, that be given then to one's doctor, healthcare provider, and that anyone mentioned on it, their rabbi and their proxy, has a copy, and that then separately people be encouraged to carefully fill out the conversation guide. And as I mentioned at the outset, like the Chavetz Chaim said, im ein ani li mili applies to having having a tzava and having one's wishes fulfilled. And it's the rabbi's job to also encourage them. It's not just im ein ani li mili, but it's also im lo achshav ematai. They have to do that. Be encouraged to do it. Don't just push this off for another time. And hence the great title, the name of the organization. I think it's very fitting that it's called Ematai.
So this document is at ematai.org/RCA. You can, of course, get to that website through the RCA website. And in it, we give instructions as well. As someone asked, where do we put this document? Very important. Jews like to put their documents in the freezer. I have no idea why. I grew up in Texas. We put ice in the freezer. But everywhere I've done a workshop, people that tell me to keep it in the freezer makes no sense to me. It should be kept in a safe and accessible place. And one of the things that we've done is create a partnership where people can create a cloud storage as well with 24/7, 365 access, along with emergency access card. All of this, including the special state requirements, explanations, all of this and whatnot, is found through the RCA website, which will get you to the special page.
Through the Ematai website, but the RCA website will direct you to the Ematai website as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, correct. Okay, can we take a few questions from the studio audience? Anything else that we still want to ask? That was really a very, very clear presentation. I really thank you very much. Anyone else have any other questions to ask?
Someone had asked in the chat about, is it always better to have someone local to be the power of attorney? And we'll get onto this in terms of identifying it. One of the things I would just mention to rabbis is talk to the person who's filling this out and talk to them about saying, encourage them to think about who it is they've got in their life, who's going to be best at this. And it's important for rabbis to tell their balabatim, don't make this a secret. Like if they show up at the hospital in a moment of truth, and all of a sudden they pull out this document, and Ruvain is the power of attorney and Sarah isn't, it can lead to a huge machloket, which is exactly what you're trying to avoid. So we want to try to encourage that type of conversation on these issues. So I see somebody asked, is this free? The answer is yes, this is a free service that we're putting together for the RCA and Ematai. And Baruch Hashem, we're thankful for the types of sponsors that have made this possible. This is a free service. This is the type of thing that the Orthodox community should be providing. This is one of those things that should not be costing. People, I want to mention this one thing. Many of your balabatim have gone to lawyers to get this done. That's fine. You should encourage your balabatim, though, to be careful about what they sign. If they're signing a general just power of attorney proxy document, okay, it's okay. Not saying anything about Orthodox Jewish law, but it doesn't get them in trouble. But if they're signing a living will document, which is a legal directive of doing X, Y, or Z, then they've set themselves up for a situation where the doctors are going to have no choice. legally to withdraw some care, which might not be appropriate under halacha. And I can't tell you how many people have shown me their documents that they've done with lawyers. And I'm like, wow, this is really going to set you up for a bad situation. So again, you want to use the different models out there, halachic models, that's great. But just encourage your balabatim to really look into what they're signing. And I'd actually encourage Rabbanim to find the local state attorneys. Many of you know who those are, who service the community. Right? There are probably 4 or 5 of them in different communities. And make sure they're aware of their RCA documents. So that way they're aware of these issues as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, people sometimes think, many hospitals now, it's become very customary that if a person goes to a hospital or has a procedure, they will say, do you have an advance directive? You need to have one on file. And if the person says no, they'll give them one. And people think they have to fill out only that one that the hospital gives them. The reality is they can have any legally binding document, which this is. So we encourage you to, if you care, if a person cares about Jewish law and Jewish values, that they should use this one instead of the one the hospital or their lawyer just automatically gives them.
Right. Okay, someone just put in the chat, you can ask the questions directly without the chat, but the difference between the Ematai version and the RCA one, the only difference, tell me if I'm wrong, is that the RCA one does not have the question explicitly about the organ donation. If a rabbi prefers not to have that whole discussion on the document. Other than that, the documents are identical. And again, we have a tremendous debt of gratitude to Ematai. This is not something that we've been able to come up with by ourselves. One last question. How does this, we've used a number of terms, Advanced Healthcare Directive, Living Will, Healthcare Proxy, DNR, DNI, how does that intersect with this for someone who is towards the end of their life? What are they signing?
So those are different. That's a different type of directive. It's another type of a legal directive, but it's not something you're signing ahead of time. It's a situation where you should be signing that only when you have a very clear diagnosis and prognosis, and sometimes that's appropriate. And then you'll be offered. There are different ways of signing these documents in different states or different hospitals or institutions to have that choice being made. But it's not something you're signing in advance. Right. And so that's not really appropriate for this type of document. And being advanced, like more generally, right? You're certainly not signing when you're 18 and or 50, whatever it might be. There are times when DNRs are appropriate. And we have a whole video on the Ematai website that Rabbi Weiner and I did in the Cedar Sinai Simulation Center to try to explain this. And I hope Rabbanim will be able to use our website as just a resource for themselves and for the Balabatim to be a little more informed about these issues. Because one of the things that comes up so often, and I hear this from rabbis from the feedback all the time, is that people are asking shilas way too late and thinking about these issues. And you're going to save yourselves as rabbis and family members much angst by proactively having these conversations and helping people get educated about these issues.
Correct.
So
and for Rabbanim beginning to look into it too late. We shouldn't be looking into these things when someone asks us a question about it, but we should be prepared. Okay, so thank you so much, Rabbi Brody, Rabbi Weiner. This was very, very instructional for all of us. And thank you to our studio audience. And we hope that we will have future such staged Zooms as an educational device for the RCA, both about these issues with both of you, as well as many other topics to help Rabbanim. Thank you so much.
The